My guest this week is Seth Neblett. Seth is a photographer, writer, and also the director of iconic music videos, including Chaka Khan's I Love Myself. He is also the son of Mallia, Queen of Funk Franklin, of Parliament, Funkadelic, and Parlet fame, and Nathaniel Nate Neblett of New Birth. But most recently, Seth wrote the book Mothership Connected, The Women of Parliament Funkadelic, an incredible look at the story of Mallia Franklin, Lynn Mabry, Dawn Silva, Debbie Wright, and Shirley Hayden, all of whom were instrumental in making Parliament Funkadelic, as well as the spin-off groups Parlet and the Brides of Funkenstein, into the legends that we know today. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome the Revolutions Per Movie, Seth Neblett. Hi, Seth.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to talk to you about your incredible book. There's a part in the book, just out of the gate, in the prologue, there's a chapter called Abducted by the Mothership.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the best introductions to an oral history book I've ever read.
Oh, thank you.
It's about you in 1978 in January being 6 years old and being taken by your grandmother to go see your mom perform on the, is it the Funkadelic tour?
Yeah.
The flashlight tour,
Flashlight.
right?
Yeah, flashlight.
And your description, just kind of setting the groundwork in terms of what you saw as a kid backstage, them opening up Parlet records that had just come out, and the experience of just seeing your mom do her thing. Can you walk us through that a bit? Because I just thought it was really a beautiful way to kind of start the story.
You know, interestingly enough, that was the very first story that I wrote.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Even before this was going to be a book. Because, see, the plan was not for me to write this book.
Right. You say that in there.
Yeah, that wasn't the plan. And that story was a story that I wrote probably early 2000s. At one time, we had a director that was interested in doing a possible documentary on these women. His name was Paul Justman, and he had done a film called Standing in the Shadows of Motown about the Funk Brothers.
Of course.
So his proposed second film was going to be about the women of Parliament Funkadelic. And I was working alongside him to make this happen. This is how long I've kind of been in the trenches trying to keep the legacy of my mother and these women alive. And there was no book, there was nothing. And at the time I was living in Detroit, which is my hometown, and Paul was still doing things associated with the film. So he was coming in and out of town a lot to Detroit. So we would go out to dinner and I would tell him these stories. And he said, Seth, you have to start writing these things down. Just start writing them down. They're amazing stories. Start writing them down. So when this book took life, so to speak, I thought that chapter would be great for an opener because it set the tone. It kind of set the tone of what the group was, and it gave a person who had never been to a Parliament Funkadelic concert a glimpse into the whole world of the concert, of the organization, of the environment. And, and for me, this was literally the first time I saw my mother on stage as a Parlet, or as, with the group. It was the first time I'd ever seen Parliament Funkadelic in any kind of live situation. So that was, that story. And as you know, because you've read the book, that's pretty much the only part of the book that is in my first person, my voice.
Yes.
And so I just thought it was important. I thought that it, in many ways, established who my mother was to me at that time. And what Parliament Funkadelic was in the world at that time. And I still remember it like it was yesterday. I still remember it like it was yesterday.
It's so beautiful. Even just the description of when the lights go down and the tear of hearing an audience scream in the dark and not knowing what's coming.
Yes.
I get it. I thought that was really amazing. When you're watching your mom, you're 6, it's great. You're like, I can't see. You need to be lifted up. And
Right.
all these things are just really wonderful little moments in it. When you see your mom, were you aware that she was a star already, or did that change something in your head when you saw that?
Everything changed that night.
Okay.
Because I had never seen her in that capacity. So everything shifted that night.
Wow. There's been a lot of people trying to make documentaries about Parliament in the past, and I wanted to talk a bit about the Don Letts documentary. As we get into it, the tales of Funkenstein from 2006 that your mom is part of.
Yes.
But one of the things that I loved about your book is just, this is a really complicated, hard story to tell. It's such a kaleidoscope. It's so fractured. And, I love that somebody will tell their story and you're completely immersed in it. And then someone will come in on the next paragraph and be like, that's not how I remember it. And your whole viewpoint changes on this situation, which I think is what's fascinating about documentaries. You take them as the truth.
Yes.
So I think that your book, does ask a lot of questions still. And if it's okay, I wanted to read something from early on in the book to you.
Sure.
That I just thought was really great for the listeners to get a sense of the scope of the book. So you say P-Funk was a group of men and women who laughed, loved, created, binged, purged, starved, and believed as one in the one. The extra hard thump of the bass, simultaneous crash of the cymbal at the beginning of every bar that holds the funk together and allows it to spread universally. As the years passed, members disappeared and reappeared at different junctures in their lives. Some members moved on with their careers. Some left the organization feeling unfulfilled or betrayed by the moment that they gave so much to. Some left only to return to what they had known for so long. A few simply refused to go, patiently waiting. Many today are still chasing their piece of the funk. It leaves people to wonder, what was ultimately the payoff? Was it the feeling of love and community? Was it the promise of fame and fortune? Was it to be part of a musical and cultural phenomenon? These are all valid, huge questions. So how did you start narrowing the story down, because it's just monumental?
Yeah. Well, the way that I approached this, I had to, and keep in mind, there's probably about 100 pages that I had to edit out of this book because it's too big.
Right.
But the way that I looked at this was, I knew that, first of all, that it was the story of the women of Parliament Funkadelic specific. And I also knew that the bulk of the book was going to be that mothership era that was so crucial in everything that Parliament Funkadelic became. And then I started to narrow it down, and it had to, I almost looked at it like a movie script in some ways, like I was developing a film. And that actually came from my conversations with Paul Justman,
Right.
the director. And he really gave me, when we were talking about the documentary, he really gave me a great analogy, which was, every woman can't be the main focus. You're going to have your stars, so to speak. You're going to have co-stars, and then you're going to, and everybody's not going to be the star. So I had to keep that in my head. And I also had to look at that frame of time as a whole and kind of pick out, this person's really vital. This person's really vital. This person's really vital. This person's vital, but maybe not as vital as these two or three. And then these two women almost play a dual role as one person in a way.
Right.
So, but I knew one thing. I knew that whole era began and ended with my mother.
Absolutely.
And Yeah, she was the first girl in that pack of girls, those mothership girls, to be connected with Parliament Funkadelic. And when Parliament Funkadelic did their last major tour in 1981, she was the last one standing.
Amazing.
So, and I even talked to the women, because I wanted to stay, unbiased and things like that. And I remember having a conversation with Lynn Mabry, because actually in the beginning, uh, 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 manuscript of this, not only was there a beginning that was in my words, there was an ending that was in my words as well, that talked about pretty much my mother kind of after Parliament Funkadelic, some of the struggles she was having, and ultimately her death and her memorial and all of those sorts of things. And I was wrestling on whether I wanted to include it or not include it. And I remember having a conversation with Lynn Mabry, and Lynn Mabry said, it started with Mallia and it should end with Mallia, period. And her saying that almost gave me permission to say, okay, the way I'm thinking about this is okay. But it was just, there are a million stories, because there were almost a million members of Parliament Funkadelic. You know what I mean? And everybody,
Absolutely.
and everybody has their own story. Everybody has the right to tell their own story, but this was something that once I did, once I did kind of make the commitment to do this, I had to see it through.
Right.
And I had a pact, an agreement with this group of women, because as you know, these women are not the only women who were Parlet brides.
Right. The five you focused on mainly are not, they're the stars. But
Right.
like you said, there are many that
Right.
are part of the book, but they're not the main focus.
Right. And and I had a duty to finish this. And when my mother passed away unexpectedly in 2010, that made it even more intense, because I had been on this road for about 4 or 5 years of putting this book together when she passed away.
Okay.
So that just made it even more compelling. And I could have, Chris, I could have probably just said, you know what, I'm going to make this book about Mallia Franklin. I think my publishing company, University of Texas, if I had made that decision, they still would have published this book, and I'd probably still be sitting here talking to you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. No doubt.
But, I'm a man of my word. And there were women that were in this collective that stuck by me, had my back, and said, we're with you and we want you to get this done. So it was not only important for me to tell my mother's story, it was also important for me to tell these women's stories. And I think essentially what ended up happening, Chris, is it ended up turning into really the story of Parliament Funkadelic, but through the lens of the women primarily.
It does. It's like, what's really interesting is to compare it to the Don Letts documentary, The Tales of Dr. Funkenstein, which was like a BBC documentary that your mom's part of.
Yes.
Don's a great filmmaker. He made, films about The Clash and, Gil Scott-Heron, and was part of Big Audio Dynamite, like a good person to make the film. But it's so interesting, the beats of an hour-long documentary about Parliament Funkadelic, it's impossible, right?
Yeah.
It's just moving through so quick. And your mom has great quotes. And there's that great quote that's in your book that's also kind of paraphrased in the documentary, where she looks amazing. She's wearing these like wraparound sunglasses that got like these fingers coming off it. She was talking about George was like in a dashiki with nothing on underneath it. And he was jumping from table to table with everything hanging. And she says, trust me now, I'm telling you the truth. It's going to be hanging, dangling, and swangling.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then they cut to George,
yeah,
with Super 8 footage. And he's got a fig leaf, over him and stuff. And so the nice thing about a documentary, obviously, is like they can cut to things like that.
Yeah.
But your book is so theater of the mind, like in terms of them walking into a theater, getting into a club, the fights, like, you know, like the story about, you know, when Parlet's like, they can't find towels backstage and they're rushing around before they go on. It's like, it's so cinematic, Seth. This book, like you said, is so full of, like, you can make a million movies out of this book.
Yes.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you. And hopefully this book will end up becoming, my ultimate goal is for it to become a scripted series. Because I see.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, because there has been talk in the past of like there being a Funkadelic Parliament movie, Eddie Murphy being attached and stuff. But then it's like, yeah, how that story is going to be so different than the story you could tell.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that's really amazing about your book is everyone's still heard. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like everybody, it's through the lens of these 5 amazing women. You know, you got Debbie Wright, Shirley Hayden, Lynn Mabry, and Don Silva, and your mom.
Yes.
I mean, well, let's back up a bit.
Okay.
Because your mom was so essential to bringing elements to Funkadelic and Parliament that changed music forever.
Yes.
And so let's talk a bit about, like, your mom. She was like singing in Detroit clubs when she was a teenager. So how did she collide with George and the Parliments at that time?
My grandparents' best friend was a woman named Joyce Thomas. Joyce Thomas was one of the heavy hitters in one of the very prominent Black sororities, Delta Sigma Theta, which is still a really big sorority in the country. I think my mother was about 15. My grandparents were always invited to any Delta event. And the biggest event was a fashion show that they did every year in Detroit. And it was huge. And it was one of those kind of things where everybody in Detroit who was somebody would go to that particular event. And this one year, 1967, the entertainment that night were the Parliments. And at the time it was, you know, we're talking Zoot Suit, Finger Wave, I Want to Testify Parliments.
Yes.
And my mother was backstage and she actually met George's fiance first, a woman by the name of Liz Bishop.
Yes.
And she met Liz, and one of the reasons that they connected was that Liz, like my mother, was very fair-skinned. She had long, wavy hair. You really didn't know if she was Black or if she was white or if she was Latin or what she was. And because my mother was the same way, she kind of gravitated to this woman. Liz was a little older than my mother. And then when the Parliments came off stage, Liz said, "Let me introduce you to my boyfriend. This is George Clinton."
Wow.
And that was it. And he introduced the rest of the Parliments and the Parliament band at the time, which was the future Funkadelic.
Right. Which in the documentary are described as sounding like the Temptations drunk. Somebody says, and it was like, okay, well, that's kind of simplifying, but
they weren't as polished. The Parliments weren't as polished. And you know, the thing about the band is their band were a decade younger than they were. So, you know, George and the guys are probably in their late 20s. Maybe a couple of them are possibly hitting 30, but their band is like 16, 17, 18, 19. And that band is, you know, Billy Bass Nelson, Tiki, Fullwood, Eddie Hazel. Bernie Worrell hadn't even gotten there yet. Gary Scheider hadn't even gotten there yet. So it was that core Funkadelic band that would become the band Funkadelic.
Yeah, and I love in the book the story about your mom asking, your grandparents if George and Liz and their baby Barbarella could stay
Yes.
at the grandparents' house,
Mhm.
which helped when promoters would come over to visit because they'd see a big house with an iron fence,
Mhm.
2 Lincoln Continentals,
Mhm.
and they'd be like, okay, this is big time. It's
Yeah.
like a really kind of an amazing story about like just, okay, we're going to use this to our advantage to, tip the scales in our favor.
Yeah, because it made George look really accomplished at
Right.
a time when he was just really literally scraping by. It made him look very accomplished.
It's kind of amazing also, how many people just seem like they fell into the P-Funk world. I believe one of the first recordings your mom did where she met Bernie Worrell, Bernie introduced her to Debbie Wright.
Yeah.
And your mom was like, it was musical sisterhood at first sight. But Debbie is just, the way she's discovered is she's just singing along with a jukebox in a restaurant. And people are like, hey, do you want to record?
Yeah.
And then she's like, who are you?
Yeah.
I mean, these stories are just in multitudes in your book in terms of how people just all of a sudden they are in Funkadelic all of a sudden.
All of a sudden. And it really did. It really, so many of those things happened just like that.
In the documentary, you have no choice but to think that George Clinton is kind of a genius 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
But, in the book, it's just so obvious that he was really, really fortunate to be around people who, like your mom, who they called the Geiger counter, who could just know her instincts were good about who to bring in, like, meeting Bootsy and being, George, you need to see him and his brother. Like people are just telling their stories. Was it hard when there were contradictions or things that were maybe, just like a rewrite of history to know like, okay, how to stack this all up so that the story is kind of be faithfully told?
One thing that I really tried to do, and hopefully I did it successfully in that book, is when there's an important event that is being talked about, I try to have more than one person chime in on it.
Yes.
So there is some confirmation that, more than likely this happened this way. There were some discrepancies with people. What I tried to do was not censor anybody's uh, recollection, but I tried to form it in a way that this thing happened. I may think that it happened this way. This other person may think that it happened this way, but this thing did happen. There were things, so there were stories that people told me that I had to take out because I couldn't verify that they happened. And there were even some stories that I was told, meaning a story that multiple people would be a witness to. And I asked the majority of those people, did this happen? And they said, no, that never happened.
Right.
So I had to be careful. I had to be careful, and I had to be, I wanted to be true to the process, and I wanted everybody to have their say. But then I also had to be, if it was something that nobody could confirm, I had to make that decision to say, okay, well, maybe I need to leave this out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some really kind of amazing stories where you're getting two different versions of something. And like, somebody is, we need to go sound check. And somebody's like in a dark hotel room. They believe it's Lynn.
Yeah.
And it's just really kind of frightening energy. And she's like, I don't need to do this anymore. I'm staying here. But then it's just interesting. Lynn, her viewpoint of it, she acknowledges it, but she's in it. So she's coming from such a different place than somebody who's just walking in the door and kind of trying to be like, I'm going to try to rescue you out of this. This seems like a bad scene.
Right.
And so, these are people that I can tell from the book that you are close to. You've known them since you were a kid. Even, like I said in the prologue, they're your aunties, you say. They're giving you kisses and hugs. And it's so I feel like there's so many people that needed to be heard in this book, because this is a story about women that weren't even acknowledged on the recorded contributions of records till Chocolate City, right, in 1975.
Right.
And even in the documentary, we're going to leap forward. I want to go back to Parlet in a second, but the end of the documentary, when they're talking about Atomic Dog and George going solo, they tell this, story that I've heard many times about, George, coming in and not, being out of his mind, and Gary running tape and him just going off, and then him leaving and then being like, we're going to make a song out of this. Fuck this. I'm just going to do it. And he builds a song around it with all these vocals. George comes in and is like, I'm ready to redo my vocals. And he's like, no, we did it. It's done. And it's Atomic Dog, right? A massive hit. That's the documentary. And you're like, cool, great story, done. I believe it. But the truth is, your mom was essential in that song getting done and being the way it is. And in your book, Gary, the person who's talking in the documentary about Atomic Dog, says, Mal was like the P-Funk dog and cat lady. She created the hook and had great one-liners. And we couldn't get a hit record without her. It was her energy, and the last hit record was Atomic Dog. George was famous for not giving people credit, and one person who is owed a lot is Mallia. She brought a lot of people to the group, people that made George a lot of money. And, that is a big part of the creation of this song.
Yeah.
And it's nowhere to be found. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. And most people don't know. And yeah, what my mother was, she was the dog and cat lady. She always had a bunch of dogs and a bunch of cats. And she came up with a lot of those, one-liners in those dog and cat songs. You know what I mean?
Right.
And,
Yes.
and, yeah, they were in the studio, and Gary told me the story that they were in the studio, said, and your mother started panting like a dog. And he said, when she did it, I was stunned. And she was saying, Gary, come on, we're all going to pant. And he said, we just started doing it. And, and not only Gary, but the guy who did the track for Atomic Dog, David Lee Spradley, he had done an interview, I think it was for Red Bull Academy. A writer, Melissa Weber, did an article for Red Bull Academy specifically about Atomic Dog and the resurrection of George Clinton as a solo artist. And David Lee Spradley, almost word for word, said the same thing that Gary Scheider said to me. Mallia started panting like a dog, and then we all started panting like a dog.
Right.
And, it's so interesting because I've often thought, because just that sample has been used so much, that I've often thought, wow, if my mother got a royalty just off of the creation of that,
right,
she would have been set financially.
Right. And it is there's one part where they are calling their tour the dog food tour. Because money is coming in and money is going out. And it is fascinating. I don't know if you have any insight into this. You can go online and you can watch multi-camera video recordings of the Mothership tour, the Flashlight tour, like great sound, 8 cameras. I mean, that was expensive back then. Do you have any idea, did you ever hear if they had a goal with this visual material that they were going to do, this stuff they were filming?
A lot of the stuff that is online from back in the day is usually from either Houston or from Landover, Maryland.
Okay.
And the reason that is is because those were the venues that had jumbotrons.
Oh, okay. So it was in-house.
Right. So
Okay.
those were the venues that had the jumbotrons. So that's why it's harder to find maybe something in Los Angeles or something in Chicago or something somewhere else. Usually, any of those old school videos you see are either from Houston or from DC, Landover, DC.
Okay.
But there were plans uh, to do a film about Parliament Funkadelic. And even deeper than that, when they went to Europe for the 1978 tour, there was a network in Holland that filmed the whole show, Parlet, Brides of Funkenstein, and Parliament Funkadelic, multiple cams because they were going to televise it.
Wow.
And it never happened. And I actually contacted a fan provided me with the network. He said, "Hey, I was around. This is the network that filmed it." And I contacted them, and they have no idea where the footage is. But the whole tour, 78 tour overseas, was filmed to be televised. So I'm sure it's multicam, whole 9 yards.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of amazing because the album here,
Mhm.
Parlet, I mean, what a great album. You have a 9-minute song that has a clarinet solo running through the first track. It's killer.
Yes.
So it's interesting too because like Neil Bogart of Casablanca Records, is best known for Kiss. Like I believe George was going to be the second artist signed to them after
I think he
Kiss.
was. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting. Can you tell the listeners a bit about like why George was like Funkadelic are going to be on this label, Parliament's going to be on this, and I'm going to start, a band that's going to be like an all-female band, vocal band, Parlet, but I want another side band that's also female called the Brides, but they're all on different labels.
Mhm.
Do you have a sense of why he chose to do it that way?
Well, according to Robert Middleman, who I did interview for the book, Robert Middleman was a part of the management company that was managing George in his heyday, backstage management. And Robert told me that the advice that George was given by backstage management was that you didn't want to sign, because George wanted another Motown, basically. He wanted a funk version of Motown. But the way that he was going to achieve that was he was going to take this massive band and break it off into sectors, basically. And according to Robert from backstage, he said that the advice that George was given by Ron Strassner, who was the main manager, was that if you sign all your acts to one label, every loser goes against a winner.
Oh, okay.
So instead of putting all of the bands on one label where they're competing with each other within the label, take different bands to different labels. And then you can get different, better amounts of money. You can, I don't even know if it was legal for him to do that, really.
Right.
Uh, but but what he did was he broke that band up into about 6 different parts and had record deals on maybe 4 different labels.
Right.
Parliament and Parlet were with Casablanca, and then Bootsy and Funkadelic were with Warner, and the Horny Horns and Brides of Funkenstein were with Atlantic, and then he had a deal for Bernie Worrell on Arista. So, it was he whoever came up with the idea, it totally monopolized the record industry at that time, and I think that was genius. Like I said, I don't know if it was legal, but I think it was genius.
Yeah, but it's so weird because later, Lynn and Dawn are talking about, they're speculating how George knew the Brides were going to go to number one.
Hmm.
And he dropped One Nation Under a Groove at the same time, basically demoting them in the charts. And they felt like that was a personal thing. Like he couldn't let them get to number one, even though he helped, not create it, but he did help facilitate it.
Yeah.
And then moments later, he's like, Parlet, you're not going to be going on the One Nation tour. Do you think there's some reality to the fact that he didn't want people to get too close to the sun on their own merits?
I think it ultimately has to do with control.
Mm-hmm.
And um and I think I even said this in the book, and this is not something that just rang true with George's organization, but it also rang true with Rick James's organization. It also rang true with Prince's organization. Is there's a pimpish mentality that, especially back then, thrived through that situation, especially with women. It's like, keep your bitches in line, so to speak. I know that the women themselves said to me, that he blocked. I'm not going to even say he, or maybe it was he, or maybe it was the organization, maybe it was the people around him, but there were roadblocks that were put up. So the brides would only go so far, so that Parlet would only go so far. And some of that may have to do with just control, being able to control the monster that you build. And um and the brides got very close. The brides got really close. Parlet didn't even really have a chance. I think a lot of that had to do with my mother, because really my mother, as far as Neil Bogart was concerned,
Yes, she was the star.
she was it, and it didn't
Yes.
matter who was around her.
Yeah, he basically tells her at that meeting she's performing in LA, and George brings Neil down to see her to basically say, you've got to be part of this thing. And she's like, what are you talking about?
Right.
But Neil says, there's no group without her.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I just look at it like this. For George to bring somebody like Neil Bogart, who's the president of one of the biggest record companies in the world, down to a club on the Sunset Strip to see somebody, it's very, very deliberate. That's a deliberate act.
Yes.
And within that, I think that when stuff started getting crazy and money started getting crazy and my mother started chirping up because of who she was, maybe the business people thought this can go off the rails with Mallia, because Parlet can't get too big, because if Mallia is the leader of this thing and she's causing problems, then maybe we don't want it to get that big.
Right. It's so fascinating, because she was inserted into a group that didn't know that she was going to be inserted into it.
Right. Because originally the trio was the Brides of Funkenstein.
Right.
And originally the Brides of Funkenstein were supposed to be the three girls that were with Sly. It was Lynn, Dawn, and a third singer by the name of Virginia Ayers. That was where George kind of got the whole thing about three girls for the brides. And then when Virginia, it didn't happen with Virginia. And when Neil Bogart said, I want Mallia, I think that, as I talked about in the book, that George took the Brides of Funkenstein concept to Neil first.
Yes.
I think if Neil had gone for the name, which I really thought he should have, because it was a great name.
Yeah, he was not into it.
He didn't like it.
It's so funny.
He didn't like the name. But I think that if he was into the name, I think that the brides would have been on Casablanca, and it would have been Lynn, Dawn, and my mother. They would have been the brides.
Wow.
And maybe Parlet would have still come out, meaning Debbie and Jeanette, or maybe Debbie and Jeanette would have just stayed with Parliament. But but yeah, that was the plan, was that, you know, the Debbie and Jeanette really thought that whatever Parlet was going to be, it was just going to be the two of them. They had already started recording some songs before my mother had even come into the group.
Right. And it seemed like that, you know, your mom was really disappointed. It was like the first time that Debbie had not kind of welcomed her
Yeah,
into something that they'd been part of on and off. And just even the infighting on like, oh, you're sitting down on the album cover as an illustration, but we're standing around you, and that makes me look weak. And just the jockeying for position.
yeah,
It just seemed like it never had a chance to kind of settle
no,
into like a partnership, a creative
no.
partnership.
And I blame that on the organization, because I think that if it had been handled in a more tactful way, and an open upfront way
Mhm.
with Debbie and Jeanette, in a respectful way with Debbie and Jeanette, and saying, hey, we know that Parlet was supposed to be just the two of you, but we're going to bring Mallia in. This is why we need her in it. And it was done in a more more understandable way. It may not have ended up like it ended up, but Debbie already had a feeling of ownership to Parlet. And, you know, here comes my mom, who, yes, they had been friends, they had known each other, they were extremely close to each other. But I think the way she was inserted into the group made her a threat.
Yeah.
And in my mother's eyes, her thing was like, look, I'm just going where George is telling me to go. I don't care who I sing with. I don't care if I'm a bride. I don't care if I'm a parlet. I don't care, because her end goal is a solo deal. So she doesn't care who she's singing with.
Right.
Whereas it was more of a, and I think even Lynn touched on it, that it was a territorial thing, with Debbie and Jeanette, because they felt we are the first two females, and we have first dibs on whatever we should have. And here comes Mallia, and yeah, and then you have to also keep in mind that Debbie at that time wasn't in her right mind,
Yeah, that's really hard section of the book.
yeah, to even really rationalize what's going on. Whereas in the beginning, she may have been like, oh, Mal's here, my girl's here. But then because of what she was going through and what she was dealing with too, that paranoia starts to set in. And it can even start separating a friendship with two girls that have been friends since they were teenagers. A decade before this Parlet thing had even happened.
Yeah, that's a really, really heartbreaking section. Just and nobody has any answers or what to do, because everyone is still really young. That's
Yeah,
the other thing. Like these are some of them are in their people are in their early 20s still. You
yeah.
know, they're and like Lynn started. How old was she when she was?
She started singing with Sly at 17. I think she started singing with P Funk. I think Lynn might have been 18, 19. Jeanette Washington as well. Jeanette was young too. I think when Parlet became Parlet, Jeanette might have been 19 or 20.
Right.
They're young, they're babies.
Yeah, they're kids and constantly touring,
Yep.
constantly recording. You've got Funkadelic puts out their record, then Parliament follows that up, and then now you've got all Bootsy is Rubber Band, and you've got all these things where okay, we're recording in Studio A, and in Studio B, run over when you're done, sing back up on this, then get back up and sing, your lead vocal on this Parlet record.
Yeah.
It's such an intense story in terms of a band that is definitely at the height of creative power and art and cultural importance, and these records sold. They were
Yes.
huge,
Yeah.
huge hit. You watch those live films, and it is an incredible show. It never stops. I just watched one recently the other night. Flashlight goes on for 30 minutes, and
Mhm.
it's incredible. It never loses energy.
Yeah.
It never goes down. Everyone gets their thing. By the time it gets to Bernie to play his synth thing, you're like,
Yeah.
I'm hypnotized here.
Yeah.
But Parlet's live stuff, there wasn't a ton of it. Am I correct?
No. The plan was the initial plan was that right after, actually not long after that first show that I talk about in the prelude, Parlet is to start rehearsing. They already have a band. They're going to leave the road for a month and then come back as an opening act
Mm-hmm.
for Parliament Funkadelic. And there's also a summer tour, 1978 summer tour booked, opening up for Bootsy's Rubber Band, who at that time was arguably bigger than George, because Bootzilla's
Right.
mountain is huge.
Right. Which I will say again, your mom brought to George.
Yes.
I mean, I just need to hammer that home.
Yes.
We would not know Bootsy like we do if your mom hadn't been like, George, check out Bootsy.
Yes.
I just need to say it again.
Yes.
So thank your mom forever,
Yes.
for
Thank
that
you.
alone.
Yes. And so that was the plan. And during rehearsal, Debbie basically had her breakdown where she was having a breakdown, but it reached its peak as Parlet were rehearsing to go on tour for the first album. So there was this mad scramble that after Debbie had to be let go, there was this mad scramble to replace her
Mm-hmm.
because there are these gigs coming up. So what ends up happening is the spring tour with Parliament is dead. It doesn't happen because by April Debbie is she just can't do it. So they get Shirley Hayden to come in. I think she rehearsed for a month, and they get her just in enough time where they can start doing shows with Bootsy for the summer. So Parlet did all of the big funk festivals for the summer. They did RFK Stadium, they did Soldier Field, they did Charlotte, North Carolina. They did all of these big shows during the summer of '78, and the plan was that the Brides were going to go on tour with Parliament Funkadelic in the fall of '78, and Parlet was going to go on tour with Bootsy's Rubber Band in fall of 1978. Bootsy has nervous breakdown pretty much. So that Player of the Year tour that was scheduled in the United States for 1978 is canceled. So there's another, kind of opportunity that Parlet has lost, but this time it's not lost because of one of the members or anything like that. So they get picked back up to go to Europe in the winter of '78. They open up for the Brides in Parliament Funkadelic. And then after that, as you know in the book, that by the time they got to the last show in Paris, all hell had broke loose. Mom was like, I'm not continuing as a Parlet. I'm done. You guys owe me money. You've been owing me money, and I'm sick of it, and I'm going to put my foot down.
Right.
And so that was pretty much, and then after she left Parlet, and she was replaced by a singer named Janice Evans in 1979. Pretty much after that, Parlet had done some funk festivals after that, but the organization really was not supporting them anymore. It was almost like when Mallia was gone, there was no real support put behind Parlet anymore. And of course, that has connection to the whole Casablanca Neil Bogart scenario too. According to Shirley Hayden, Casablanca didn't know that Mallia wasn't in Parlet anymore until Parlet Parlet came out to do
Right.
some promo in LA, and all the Casablanca people are like, "Who is she?"
Yeah. Nice try. Nice try.
Nice try. And we're just gonna throw this random album cover out. We're gonna leave all of Mallia's vocals on the album.
Oh my
As a
gosh.
matter of fact, the first single that comes out, that's the first voice you're gonna hear.
Wow.
But then when they got to LA and Casablanca people saw Parlet, they were like, "What Parlet is this?"
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing because even the descriptions of the members of when the brides are on stage and Parlet's on the stage, and how George had them on separate sides,
Yeah.
and just the looks that they could give each other, like nonverbal language in terms of like just power and feeling and energy and illness. It's so much is going on.
Yeah.
You captured this so well, Seth, because this is such a kaleidoscopic story to tell. It's there's so much going on in it, but the great thing about the way you tell it is I was never lost. It was very cinematic, and it just kept moving, often to, obviously, as the story goes on and they're getting into the dog food tour era, and your mom's left, and Shirley all of a sudden decides to put on the crown and walk out, and it's just magnificent. I mean, because I don't know how you could write this being so close to it.
Um, I can't necessarily say that there was difficulty that I had in writing this, because you have to understand that a lot of this I witnessed. So in a lot of ways, a lot of it was just writing a lot of information I already knew, and fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of it I witnessed. A lot of that drug abuse I witnessed. A lot of that physical abuse, or some of that physical abuse, I witnessed, as a child. A lot of the feelings of hurt and abandonment and feeling used and played, all of those things I witnessed. And as I said, that in the beginning, when we first started talking about this book, which also came from Paul Justman, the director, who could not find anybody that was interested in doing a documentary, and he said, "You're going to have to do a book."
Right.
He said, even with Standing in the Shadows of Motown, they had to do a book first.
Wow.
So that's how the whole journey of this book thing even started.
Right. You say it you talk about that in the book, and I just was like, I had never thought of that.
Yeah,
And it seems frustrating in a way,
it was. It
but
was.
it seems like it's a given that there will be something, whether it's a narrative
Oh,
or
yeah.
a documentary series.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things I found about your book is that in the end, the majority of people were really happy to have gone through what they went through
Mhm.
with the world of being in Parliament or Funkadelic, even with the troubles. Your mom was really supportive. She would show up and record and do things over time, even when she was no longer really part of the organization anymore, or was waiting in line to just get paid like
Right.
everyone was.
Mhm.
It just seemed like at times the art and the mission was bigger than some of those problems. But in the end, was your mom, was she happy with her time in that, and like what she did and what she got to accomplish? Or did she feel like there were missed opportunities, that she was like, man, if we'd figured this out, or we'd had something different, we could have really made something different?
I think my mother um, was always torn.
Mm-hmm.
She was a funkadelic to her core, to the point to where she had opportunities to cross over into popular music and do things as a solo artist, that because she didn't want to leave her roots behind, she uh, didn't take those opportunities, which, as far as I was concerned, may not have been the smartest. But that was the decision that she made. I think that I don't think I think that she was happy and grateful to what she contributed to Parliament Funkadelic as a talent. I think that she always felt unappreciated, undervalued, uh, not acknowledged for all the other things that she did outside of just being a singer in the group. My mother's role was a lot bigger than just being a vocalist, just being a parlet. You know, her universe in Parliament Funkadelic is a lot bigger than that. It's just a fact in this story. It's just a fact. So I think for my mother, I think that um, I don't know if she had any regrets for anything that she did in Parliament Funkadelic. I think there were things that I thought she should have been regretful for more than she thought she should have been regretful for.
She's so frank in this book.
Yeah, that's who she is. That's her personality. Even as you can tell other people talking about her, is that she did not bite her tongue.
Yeah.
She did not, if she's something she didn't like, she said it. And you know, that can be problematic sometimes. You know, when you have somebody that is looking at a situation and is the one that's going to say, okay, I'm raising my hand. I've got something to say about this. This is some bullshit.
Right.
You know,
What a different band without your mom's like energy, Geiger counter,
yeah,
and just again, they say she could see a bigger picture than George could.
yeah. I mean, you know, she knew when she met Bootsy that he was a funkadelic. And Bootsy says it, George says it, Frankie Cash from Bootsy's Rubber Band says it, that she had a plan before any of us had a plan. She knew.
Wow.
Same thing with Junie, you
Yes.
know, from the Ohio Players. And and you know, I had to, and I've said this before in this process, is that what I had to do is I had to get bold about who my mother was and what my mother did. And one thing that I do know is that every hit that Parliament Funkadelic has ever had, it was George and somebody that she introduced into the organization. So if you think about that, and if you think that if that never happened and she never brought in those people, what would Parliament Funkadelic have been or turned into? I'm sure it would have turned into something because it was something before any of these people came, but it would not have become the juggernaut that it became, that inspired popular music and hip hop and rap and all of these other things, that it inspired Afrofuturism and stage performance. So she's a key link in that whole lineage of Parliament Funkadelic, the whole thing. And you know, I had to really just be bold about it and say it because it's a fact.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, yeah, how long did you work on this book for?
I had already been doing interviews with some of the women for other things we were trying to do. I tried to orchestrate a Parlet reunion back in the early 90s. I tried to orchestrate a reunion with Parlet and the Brides in the 90s. So uh as a matter of fact, there are pieces on YouTube of interviews that I did with my mother and Shirley and Jeanette back in like 1994.
Yes. And I'll put links to that in the show
Okay.
notes.
But you know, I mean, so technically I've been doing this
Since you saw her when you were 6.
right for 30 years. I've been doing this, right? But for the book, 2005, I started calling people outside of the interviews I'd done with the women. That's when I really started reaching out to, like, you know, Bernie Worrells and Gary Scheiders, and I tried to be very balanced in the people that I interviewed. I didn't just want to interview, uh, you know, the musicians. I also I wanted to interview the business people. I wanted to interview the road managers.
That was fascinating.
Yeah, because you can see it from different sides,
Yes.
you know, and I must say that almost in every interview that I've done for this book, there was something that I told the interviewee that they didn't know. They had absolutely no idea
Wow.
that this had happened, that this is how this was handled, that this is the reason that this didn't happen. So for me to be able to interview everybody from the stars to the women that were running the offices and watching checks get forged and trying to keep uh, from the checks being forged and
Right. Yes.
keeping the dope dealers at bay and keeping
Right.
IRS at bay and all of the stuff that was going on.
When, George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic were inducted into a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Grammys or into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the women were not invited. That's just mind-blowing to me.
Yeah. Well, the Rock Hall has been a source of controversy, even with the fans of Parliament Funkadelic. And we never, even when my mother was still living, there was never a explanation of, what we were told was that you had to be in the band 20 years or more to get inducted. Okay.
Okay.
The band was inducted in 1997. In 1977, the original brides, Lynn and Dawn, and the original Parlets, Debbie, Jeanette, and Mallia, were members of Parliament Funkadelic,
Yes.
were recording with Parliament Funkadelic and actually recording their Parlet and Brides albums at that time. My mother's contract with George is July such and such 1977. So they were in the band. And then the other thing that made it a little fishy was that Junie was inducted, which he should have been. And I say this, that everybody that was inducted should have been inducted.
Sure.
But Junie was inducted. But Junie was brought in by my mother to start producing with George, and his first task was to be the band leader for the brides.
Right.
So if Junie was eligible for induction, then the women should have been, at least the original women, should have been eligible for induction. But we don't know. We really don't know who made the decision. We don't know who chose who. We don't know if it was the Rock Hall, if it was George, if it was. We really don't know.
Okay.
But hopefully this book can help to fix that injustice. Maybe the women can be inducted now, honorary induction, some sort of acknowledgement, because I mean it's not even acknowledgement. And the crazy thing is that if you go see Parliament Funkadelic, at least the last time I saw the exhibit, which was probably about 20 years ago, I think the famous picture with Debbie and Jeanette is the one that's hanging in the Rock Hall.
Right.
And I know when they were inducted, the video presentation that they were inducted, it was full of footage of Lynn and Dawn and Debbie and Jeanette, and so and when the Grammy thing happened, I must say that when the Grammys happened in 2019, Barbarella Bishop, George's daughter, called me, and she asked me to be her date because they were having it here in LA. And she said, Seth, she said, your mother should be inducted with them. But I and my dad feel that you should at least be there. So, would you be my date? Sure. So I went. Lynn Mabry was actually there, but Lynn was not there as a member of the brides. Lynn was there because their daughter, Lynn and Junie's daughter, Akasha, was accepting Junie's Grammy.
Mm.
So, and And I mean, I'm telling you, when I walked in, one of the first people I saw was Tom Vickers, who was P Funk's publicist through that whole thing, and
Mhm.
somebody who has always been a supporter of my mother. And he said to me, he said, Seth, your mother should have been inducted with them. He said, there's no doubt about it. She should have been. If no female was inducted, she should have been inducted. And I appreciate all that. I do appreciate that, you know, there are people that feel that way. You know, you know, so hopefully maybe this story, now that this story is known, because before then it was just an unknown story. People didn't know. They just thought, oh, they're just background girls, you know, they're indispensable. That's kind of how it's been set up. It's been set up like, you know, a lot of the musicians, which are great musicians, are essential, and a lot of the singers are disposable.
Right.
But you know, the thing is just as a lot of those musicians were great musicians, a lot of these vocalists were great singers, and they should be acknowledged that their instrument, their voice, was just as great as Eddie's guitar, or you know, Bootsy's bass, or you know, that they also uh, contributed things that were just as essential.
Yeah, your mom's voice is everywhere
Yeah,
on these records.
yeah, on everything.
Everywhere.
Yeah,
You know, and that
yeah,
was the thing. I didn't know how much, right?
yeah. I mean, just since we've been doing this, just since I've been doing promotion on this book, one of the things that has been put together, or one of the promotion pieces, has been that I've been creating these uh, a cappella little reels where I've been able to strip the vocal to
Oh,
just,
amazing.
yeah, to just focus on the vocal. And I've been doing that with some Parliament Funkadelic songs. And it's so funny because I knew my mother was there, but then when you hear the acapella, I hear how heavy in it she is.
Absolutely.
You know, that maybe I mean, you know, I hear her because I know her voice. I mean, I
Right.
hear her,
Sure. Right.
you know, but when you don't have the music, it's like I really hear her. And I'm like, wow, I didn't realize that she was so high in the mix as she was. But, you know, some people say that she was the P Funk sound when it came to females.
You spent a large part of your life leading up to this book being finished. And now you're going to spend a large part of your life getting this next chapter together, you know,
Yeah.
a documentary or a narrative. Which are you leaning towards, a documentary or a narrative?
I think that the documentary is probably going to be the obvious, but my goal is a dramatic series, because you have to see it. You have to see the pageantry, you have to see the costumes, you have to see the situations, you have to really see that kind of stuff. And this is the thing, and this is what I want people to understand, you know, for me, is that, and I think I touched on it in the book, is that a lot of people were sacrifices to this story. A lot of children were sacrifices to this story. I was one of them, you know.
Yes.
For my pretty much my whole life, you know, my mother, her main goal was to be successful, you know, and be the queen of funk and to do all those things. And I was kind of reared in it, assisting her to make those things happen. So for me, I had to not only do this for my mother and do this for these women, I had to do it for myself. Because my thought was, if nobody knows this story, then what part of my relationship with my mother was in vain if nobody knows? So everybody's got to know, and everybody has to know this story. And you know, and when she passed away at 57, it was like I had to continue. I had to pick the torch up and I had to continue so that her story could be told. Yeah, no, and just say that she could be acknowledged, for everything that she did for Parliament, Funkadelic, and the music industry as a whole, because she connected a lot of people. She did a lot of things, and she even outside of Parliament, Funkadelic. She took Parliament people to other organizations to help, you know, uh, refresh their sound, and she, you know, so people needed to know. People have to know that. So that's why this is so important to me. This was why this was just so important to me. What has been interesting is that, when you've been doing something so long and it finally becomes a real thing, like I said, this may be the only book I ever write
Right.
because I didn't do this to be an author. I did this out of necessity.
Right.
So I may never write another book, or this might be some new, new doorway
Sure.
where now I'm writing the story of the Rick James women, or the story of the Prince women, or the story of the whatever, because I'm connected to all of it.
Right.
So, so now I think that now that it's out, I had one moment to where it was just like a real moment, a watershed moment. And it was when I got my first review. Kirkus Reviews did a review of the book, Advanced. And for all intents and purposes, it was a good review. And I got a message from the editor of the book series, Jessica Hopper, and she said to me, uh, "This is a great review." She said, "And Kirkus isn't they don't softball,
Right.
so consider this a win." There was something about the fact that somebody outside of my immediate circle had read the book to where I knew at that moment, this is now out of my orbit and it's now in the world. That's when I kind of broke down, and that people are actually reading it now. And so that has been the thing for me that has been crazy, is that people are reading it and that people are learning the story. And I think that as of now, it's not this journey of Mothership Connected hasn't ended. There's a whole new chapter that's going to come now, that the book is out in the world and that people will know the story. There's going to be a whole nother chapter after that. But, I'm more than happy because it hasn't been easy. It hasn't been easy. It's been it's it's been um great that I've gotten it done, but there have been bumps in the road. There were women that should be on this cover that aren't on this cover during this journey,
Right.
because of their own issues or wishes or, whatever. So it hasn't been smooth sailing. It's been sometimes challenging, especially when you're personally connected to it. And it's not just you interviewing a bunch of women or interviewing a bunch of people, it's you interviewing people that you consider your family. So the fallout sometimes can be extra hard,
Sure.
but uh it's done. It's done. It's out here, and I'm excited for whatever's coming next. So I think a documentary, and I'm sorry, I'm a Gemini, so my mind is all over the place.
And we haven't even scratched the surface. There's great stories about potential tours with Grace Jones that fall through. Your mom working with Dr. Dre.
Mhm.
There's so much in this book that we haven't even touched on, and I'm excited to read it again because there's just was so much, and I kept telling people as reading it, because the book wasn't out yet,
Mhm.
just like, oh my God, you won't believe this part. And some of it was just about the injustice of things within the organization. Some of it were just incredibly heartfelt stories. Others were just really funny, like when Lynn finally kind of meets the Funkadelic people for the first time, and she's like, I smelled them before I saw them.
Yeah.
She's like, and as soon as I was getting ready to walk away from his funk, I then bumped into somebody else. It was just, they're just really, everyone is really, they're giving you their best.
Yeah.
And it really comes through in this book. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, Bootsy, my uncle Bootsy, I have to say, when I first moved out here to LA in 2006, and we were so frustrated because we had gone through a couple of writers and it didn't work and it wasn't happening. And I was still kind of, even though I hadn't planned to be the one to write it, I was still kind of doing things. Like if there was an opportunity to interview somebody, I would. And my thing was, I thought I was stockpiling information for whoever was going to ultimately write it.
Right.
And Bootsy looked at me and he said, just you do it.
Well, who should play your mom in the movie?
Oh God, I don't know. That has been a question. That has been a question.
Yeah.
That been asked for years, and I absolutely have no idea because she was very much like a unicorn.
Right.
And she was a mixed woman that looked more white than black, in the blackest band in the world, who sang like a sanctified church woman. And so she's kind of like I don't know. They may have to find, unknowns. But I
Right.
think that this project as a film project or as a series project would be a showcase for actresses, those main actresses. You talk about a great showcase for an actresses,
Absolutely.
a great, unbelievable showcase. And really telling this story, I think that this story, as far as when it comes to women of color, this is probably one of the ultimate stories of sex, drugs, and rock and roll in the 70s, and disco and fame, and drugs and all the stuff that comes with it.
Oh, yeah. Seth, I'm so happy for you and excited for you.
Thank you so much.
It just, I'm again, I really, really am so glad that it came through your, your vision and your closeness to the material, because like you said, this book needed to be written and would have been written by someone at some point. But I'm so glad it's you,
Thank you.
because I can just tell people they're just trusting you with these stories, and it's just a beautiful book. So again, congratulations.
Thank you.
So, well, at the end of every episode, I always ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on what we're talking about.
Okay.
But I have to backtrack a little bit because you talked about the pageantry
Mhm.
of the band.
Mhm.
And for you to answer this last question, I need to let the listeners know a little bit about what Parlet wore during their first live show.
Mhm.
So, in 1978, you say it was your mom who entered first, wearing a massive crown embellished with sequins, rhinestones, emeralds, and rubies, a tight black costume littered with multicolored jewels, and a cape with layers of nylon wings that draped to the floor. Following her was Jeanette Washington, and she came in with a gold lame costume that included a bikini top with small mirrors on her chest that emoted beams of light across the crowd, paired with tight pants open down the sides with large flaming hearts. And then the new singer, Shirley Hayden, comes in wearing a white bodysuit with a neckline shaped like a lightning bolt that plunged to her navel, and a shiny gold harness with multicolored feathers that was strapped across her pelvis and tights. Okay, there's your movie right there. So, knowing this, on a scale from 22 being the lowest and 173 being the highest, how many sequins, rhinestones, emeralds, and rubies and the collective crown do you give the women of Parliament Funkadelic and what they brought to this world?
Oh, can I say 1 million?
You know what? You can say it.
1 million. They brought 1 million. They collectively brought 1 million.
Because that's the right answer. That's what I had written right here. 1 million. I had 1 million written down. That was a trick question. I was worried about the head weight. 173 is a lot to get on stage with. But of course, it's 1 million. It's stratospheric. And this story, now that you've told it, will never end. It's fantastic, Seth. So again, congrats. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday on your favorite podcast app and additional bonus episodes every Sunday on our Patreon. The show is a completely independent affair, so the best way to support the show is through our Patreon at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get weekly bonus episodes and shows, exclusive limited edition flexi discs and records and CDs featuring guests that have appeared on the show, and other exclusive goods sent to you just for joining. You can follow us on social media at Revolutions Per Movie and also find out more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!